So just a little deck tech for the deck we're running through in this series. Our deck is, of course, Magmar, Electabuzz, Magbuzz, some kind of name like that. But the idea is that we have our two main attackers, which are Electabuzz and Magmar. So why are we using these specific Pokemon? So Electabuzz, this is one of the classic big basics. Basically, a lot of Pokemon, well, not a lot of Pokemon, the rare Pokemon that have 70 HP and also have good attacks. So Electabuzz, that first attack is decent. Sometimes we need to use that for a variety of reasons, like we need to lock them down for a turn or at least try for it. It's also pretty good because Thunder Punch can do damage to ourselves. So if we can need a guaranteed 10 and we don't want to hurt ourselves, Thunder Shock comes in pretty great there. That second attack, Thunder Punch, is mainly why we're here. We can threaten to do 40 damage. Now, it doesn't always do 40 damage, and we can hurt ourselves as well, which can cause problems, but that kind of threat of being able to do 40 damage for 2 energy is fantastic. Like, we can actually do 40 damage, and then kind of the above the board mental games we can play with threatening to be able to do 40 damage can make our opponents play some unoptimal plays, burn some resources just because they think, what's going to happen here. Big thing here, also keep in mind, is that we're weak to fighting with this Pokemon. So things like Hitmonchan, which is another efficient attacker, hits us for weakness. There's a lot of Hitmonchan in the format. Something to be worried about. We don't want to play into that because we're going to go down pretty quick. And the 2 retreat cost is actually not the highest, but we don't want to be necessarily wasting 2 energy to retreat our Pokemon. Our other main attacker is Magmar. Once again, we have that 70 HP, which is fantastic, and it's a basic. We don't have to evolve it. Smokescreen's a very good attack. It only does 10 damage, but it's sort of like Lickitung, where we can maybe, it's not paralyzed, but it's like pseudo-paralyzed in some cases. It may be better than paralyze. I won't get too crazy on that. But great attack, especially if we need to stall out for a second to buy some time to set up. Smog is also a very good attack. The problem with that is that you need specifically 2 fire energies, so typically we want to make sure that we're conserving those just because of this attack. Now this attack only does 20 damage, however it has a chance to poison, so in some cases you might want to think about it doing possibly 30 damage, sometimes 40, depending on the scenario. I wouldn't count on it. Once again, it's a risky play, sort of like with our Electabuzz's Thunder Punch. We can't count on it, but once again, there's that threat of doing a bunch of damage for the same reasons I talked about with Electabuzz. The 1 retreat cost, amazing. Pretty easy to retreat. The weakness to water really only comes up if you're playing against Rain Dance, otherwise you don't see too much water Pokemon. You may sometimes run into some sort of off meta decks where you're seeing a Staryu that can do 20 damage for 1 energy. That's probably the more common non-Rain Dance Pokemon, I guess. But we're probably not going to see it in this series, but something to be aware of. And when I'm talking about Rain Dance, I'm talking about a deck that uses Blastoise to power out energy very quickly to power up some attackers and do big damage. Next Pokemon, Scyther. Now Scyther, once again, 70 HP, we love that. It resists fighting, which is huge. So we can put this out against a Hitmonchan, we can put this out against some other Pokemon, and really buy some time if we need to. Weakness to fire, not the worst per se. You're going to see Magmars mostly for the fire weakness. Sometimes you'll run into some Charizard builds that are kind of off meta, but usually this isn't too painful for us. There are some decks that run a Ponyta that can attack for some colorless energy. We're probably not going to see that today either. Scyther's Sword Dance, that's not going to come up for us. We're not even running any grass energy. It can be useful, but so it is. The reason that we're really running this is the free retreat cost. So one of the best tricks you can do with Scyther is that you can advance Scyther as our active Pokemon, and then we can go into whichever attacker we specifically need, so that we're not burning resources to retreat. We're not using scoop ups. We'll talk about those cards here in a second. Things like that. So Scyther is just a good Pokemon to always advance if we get knocked out, and then we can pick what we want to actually send in. And sometimes that is Scyther. That slash for 30 actually isn't too taxing. The 30 guaranteed 30 is great. We can also attach colorless energies, so that can fill out 2 of our 3 energy requirements on the Scyther. So we can kind of attack for 2 energy cards sometimes if you want to think about it like that. Not necessarily what we want to be doing, but it is an option in our toolkit, I guess. Last Pokemon we have, kind of an odd one, just kind of in there, is Ditto. So this only has 50 HP, but its power is the reason it's here, is because we can copy another Pokemon. There are some Pokemon that is difficult for us to deal with, so we'll send out Ditto to kind of copy them. Another cool thing we can do with Ditto is that it can use these colorless energies to power its attack. So we can surprise somebody by dropping in Ditto, retreating Scyther, and throwing Ditto out there, and then we can copy their 2 energy attack for 1 energy. So we can really surprise some people with that. Hopefully we get to see Ditto today. It's not a thing that's going to happen very often, but it is another tool kind of in our bag. A thing also to keep in mind is that even if you're copying a Pokemon, because I've seen some people fall into this trap too, like, I don't know, let's say we're against a Wigglytuff, we're copying him, we want to use Wigglytuff's big attack, and then, oh, shoot, we need to retreat our Ditto. If it's over 50 HP and we retreat, your Ditto is going to die. Keep that in mind. Another play you can do is if you see enemy Dittos, and the thing that could happen to us is that, you know, that we're over that HP threshold and you gust out another Pokemon, Ditto goes to the bench and dies. Just something to be aware of, so sometimes you may want to scoop up that Ditto rather than risk losing it and giving up a prize. So for our trainer cards, we've got Bill. Draw 2 cards is great here. We're a pretty aggressive deck. We always want to be attaching energy, so we're always wanting to fill up our hand. We will want to keep in mind that in Base Fossil, we are going to run into a lot of decks that are quote-unquote stall builds that are trying to draw the game out to where you deck out, and they're more efficient at putting cards back in their deck than we are, obviously. We can do that, but we're not great at it, so you don't want too aggressively to draw against some decks. Hopefully we see one today so you can see what I mean. Energy removal. Almost all decks in the format are going to run a number of these. Taking energy off a Pokemon to set somebody back can help us out a lot. If we can use this against a DCE, that's pretty great, because I guess all decks can only run 4 double colorless energy cards. So we can really catch some decks off guard if we take their DCEs. Double colorless energy right here, we run them ourselves. Energy retrieval, because we're going to need to get energies back. One of our weaknesses is, once again, we have some specific energy needs, like we're going to need electric, we're going to need fire specifically for Magmar. Our other Pokemon can kind of use whatever, but these 2 have specific needs, so energy retrieval is pretty important. Gust of Wind, we can use this to if they retreat to the bench, if there's specific targets we need to take out, we can gust them out, we can start hitting them. We're pretty good at taking knockouts, so gust is pretty good here. I might even consider running more of these in here. This is just kind of the build I'm at right now. Item Finder is awesome. When we use our trainer cards, we can obviously use this to recur cards, get them back. The discarding 2 cards is kind of taxing, so we don't want to just be cracking these all the time, but if we're in a spot where, like, I have to have this card, either to take a prize or we could lose next turn, Item Finder's great. Last, this is kind of a higher, I wouldn't say it's like super high skill level, but this is an important card in our deck. So this can do a couple of things. So what we typically want to do with this is on one of our early turns, or if they have a lot of cards in hand, we want to play through our trainers if we can, especially if we can do it early, and then we can hit the opponent with a last, shuffle all their trainer cards in, because that puts us at a huge advantage because we've been able to play out a bunch of cards, get resources, and then we're shutting their resources off. So we can put opponents in a kind of a bad spot, kind of put them on the back foot, and then start kind of going in with our big hitters. Another thing we can kind of do is if we're in a stall matchup or we're against another aggressive deck and we're not quite getting there and it's getting towards the end of the game and we're about to deck out, is we can hold one of these and start shuffling trainers back in to buy more turns. So it is an option we have. Typically we're using this to put the opponent on the back foot, but keep that in mind as if we're going to deck out, we've got a last, okay? And we can find those with item finders as well if we need to play it a couple times. Plus power, you're going to see this in aggressive decks. Sometimes you need that extra 10 damage to knock out a Pokemon, which can save taking, 20 or 30 extra damage on your Pokemon when they're attacking back. So getting that extra kind of turn of damage can really gain you some momentum. Plus power's amazing card. This is another card we might want to run more of. I just have 2 of it in here for now. Professor Oak, every deck's probably going to run 3 or 4 of these. We don't always want to be using this card because it does empty your hand, so we don't want to just throw away our resources willy-nilly. But if we can strategically play out our cards, we're attaching our energy, one a turn, we're making sure we're not losing too much, then Oak's a fantastic card. And we always want the option to Oak. It's not something we always want to do, but we want the option. In case something goes sideways, we can try to find something, get ourselves out of a hole. Scoop Up, this is pretty good. Probably just straight up better than Switch because instead of just switching our Pokemon, we can scoop them up, take the damage off them, put them back on the bench. We do lose energy that way, but we're pretty efficient at getting our energy. We have a lot of energy in deck, not the worst thing in the world, and we're going to be smart about using our energy when you know how to do it. So sometimes that's pretty good for getting Electabuzz out of there because he's got that 2 retreat cost that's pretty high. If we want to scoop up specific Pokemon in our matchup, we'll get there if we see it. Super energy removal. Decks usually run more of these than we are. Just a great card, especially if you are against opponent Scythers. We can take all their energy off their attacker. We can catch some other decks off guard with this, but people are expecting this. And then lastly, we have our energy suite. We have 20 energy. This is higher than probably most decks, not by too much, but we are running 4 double colorless energy. That's good for powering up our Ditto like we already talked about. We can copy their heavy attacks for cheaper amount of cards. You can also use this for Electabuzz's Thunder Punch. It's not what you want to do, but it is probably more efficient towards the end of the game where you are looking for specific energy cards or your resources are getting light. Typically we're using this for Scyther Slash because we can go in for 2 energies. We are running 8 fires, obviously to power up Magmar, and then we have the 8 lightning for Electabuzz. There may be some debate over running more fire than electric. I haven't run into it too badly as an issue because we have access to energy, and if you're playing, I wouldn't say playing smart, but if you're playing wisely, you can make sure that isn't too much of an issue. Okay, so we'll get into some matches. We're as you're going to see, a pretty aggressive deck. Now we're not necessarily the most aggressive deck. That'd be more like an Arcanine deck where they're willing to sacrifice Electrodes and attack us very quickly, and they have to kill death die us like right now. But we're pretty aggressive. Against some other aggressive decks, we may have to shift into the kind of control role a little bit. but typically we want to take prizes. Our worst matchups are probably going to be stalled because we do need to kind of dig and take prizes. But I think we can fight through those kind of efficiently, especially because we can kind of cruise through. Lickitung's pretty big in this format, but we can put some big damage on those pretty quickly, force them to spend resources. But we'll probably see a stall deck today. They're not that uncommon, but we're definitely a more aggressive deck. Anyway, I think at this point I'm kind of rambling. Let's get into some matches.